The clothes he had on, the white tennis, are still white today.
The ex-NOPD officer remains on death row at Angola. It's the same prison Lacaze will return to from court. Lacaze was convicted on 3 counts of capital murder along with ex-NOPD officer Antoinette Frank.
It's like a puzzle. You can have a puzzle with 90 pieces. If one missing, something's wrong with that puzzle, right? And they want to give him a life sentence without parole.
Number 3, Mikhail Popkov. Mikhail Popkov was born on March 7, 1964 in Russia. He worked as a policeman before later becoming a security guard. He has a wife and a daughter. His wife was also in the police and provided an alibi for Popkov several times. It has been speculated that Popkov had been targeting women who resembled his reportedly alcoholic mother who mistreated him in his childhood. From 1992 to 2000, Popkov is suspected of taking the lives of up to 29 women. He would pick up slightly intoxicated women who were just leaving bars or parties, using his police car and uniform to gain the victim's trust in some of the slayings. Popkov would then drive them to the forest, where he took advantage of them and took their lives. The victims were reportedly axed, knifed, or choked. One of the victims was decapitated, and another's heart had been ripped out. He would ravish the victims after they were deceased as well. One of Popkov's victims survived his attack and later identified a photo of him. However, police chose to believe Popkov's wife, who had provided an alibi. Popkov claimed he stopped slaying when he became impotent and attracted syphilis. He had been labeled the Wednesday Slayer by police, referring to the day when many of the bodies were found. He was arrested on June 23, 2012, when he went to Vladivostok to buy a car after having his DNA sampled along with 3,500 other police officers. He was suspected of taking the lives of at least 29 women, 25 of whom were aged 19 to 28 and 4 who were aged 35 to 40. All of the victims were residents of Angarsk, Irkutsk Oblast. He confessed to 24 slayings and was later charged with them on October 31, 2013. After the questioning, Mikhail Popkov said he stopped after a sexually transmitted disease left him impotent and he lost the will to commit these crimes. In January 2015, Popkov is found guilty of 22 slayings and sentenced to life in prison. But he does not end there, given that in 2017, the sentenced confessed to 59 more slayings. With at least 78 victims on his record, Mikhail Popkov is currently held in the Black Dolphin prison, one of Russia's toughest security prisons, where he will never see the light of day again. Number 2, Manuel Pardo. Manny Pardo was 21 years old when he joined the Florida Highway Patrol in 1978, but his first stint in law enforcement was short-lived. Accused of falsifying more than 100 traffic warnings and correction notices, he was allowed to resign a year after he joined the force in lieu of being fired. It seemed a small concession at the time, but it was all he needed. 2 months later, Pardo was hired by the Sweetwater Police Department to patrol a Miami suburb. Still, his problems continued, and in 1981, Pardo was one of 4 officers charged in a series of brutality cases filed by the state attorney general's office. Those charges were later dismissed, but Pardo was fired on January 21, 1985, after he flew to the Bahamas to testify in defense of another ex-cop held for trial on drug-running charges. Even then, the worst was yet to come. On May 7, 1986, Pardo and 25-year-old Roland Garcia were arrested on the slaying charges, accused in the slayings of drug dealer Ramon Alvaro Cruz and his girlfriend Daisy Ricard, who were shot and slain on April 23, 1986. Weeks later, Metro-Dade officials announced that Pardo and Garcia were linked to a total of 9 such victims, including 6 men and 3 women, dating back to January 1986. Detective Ted MacArthur told the press they were drug rip-offs and quantities of cocaine were taken from the scene. The slaying spree had ended with Ramon Alvaro Cruz, alleged to be Pardo's underworld employer since he was fired by Sweetwater PD. As evidence against the deadly cop, prosecutors cited Pardo's diary, which included written entries about the slayings along with news clippings and photographs of several bloody corpses. Nazi memorabilia recovered from Pardo's home, together with the prisoner's own statements, revealed that he was also an ardent admirer of Adolf Hitler, believing that Jews and blacks were inferior species deserving of extermination. Legal maneuvers delayed Pardo's trial for 2 years, but prosecutor David Waxman stood by the state's original theory of an ex-cop gone bad, addicted to cocaine and easy money, slaughtering coke dealers who rip off their stashes, eliminating any witnesses who crossed his path. Pardo denied it, painting himself as a one-man vigilante squad committed to eliminating parasites and leeches from law-abiding society. His court-appointed lawyer, Ronald Guralnick, was committed to a different tack, presenting insanity, and indeed, Pardo seemed intent on proving that point when he took the witness stand in his own defense on April 13, 1988. Testifying against Guralnick's advice, Manny didn't bother to deny the slayings, rather he regretted that his final body count had been so low. Pardo's extreme racist views may have hurt him as much as the physical evidence of his guilt when he appeared before a jury that included 5 blacks and 2 Jews. Metro-Dade detectives listed the Nazi paraphernalia found in his home and describes the swastika tattoo worn by one of his dogs. Pardo received the capital punishment and was fatally punished in Florida on December 11, 2012, by lethal injection. Manuel Pardo Jr. spent a total of 26 years on the row before his demise. Number 1. Antoinette Frank. Antoinette Frank is a former New Orleans police officer who was convicted of the robbery of a restaurant where a fellow officer worked as a security guard and the slayings of 3 other people, including her partner in the police department, who was also a security guard at the restaurant. Frank had an unstable childhood, but she had wanted to become a police officer since she was a small girl. She was from a broken family. Her brother was a fugitive, her father would appear in her life occasionally, and Frank became distressed about these issues, needing psychiatric help. Frank has claimed that her father took advantage of her physically and mentally when she was a child. According to author Chuck Hustmeyer, a former federal agent and author of a book about Frank, when Frank applied to become a police officer in Louisiana, she lied about her psychological problems. Frank applied with the police in 1993. Several red flags turned up during the hiring process. She had been caught lying on several sections of her application and had flunked 2 standard psychiatric evaluations. Psychiatrist Philip Scuria examined her and advised in no uncertain terms that she not be hired, saying she was shallow and superficial. When it looked like her application was stalling despite protesting Scuria's evaluation, she left a note detailing her intention to take her life and disappeared for over a day. Despite this, the NOPD was chronically short-handed and desperate to get more people on the force. Accordingly, she was hired on February 7, 1993. She graduated from the police academy on February 28, 1993. On November 25, 1994, Frank handled a shooting incident in which Rogers Lacaze, a known drug dealer, was one of the suspects. The association between them became close and constant. On one occasion, Lacaze accompanied her on a complaint call, and she introduced him as a trainee.
Orleans criminal district judge has resentenced Roger Lacaze to, well, this all happened just within the last 2 hours today that has gripped the New Orleans Police Department and this community for the last 24 years. Well, this is the latest in that stunning triple murder case. The duo both sentenced to die for killing Frank's fellow police officer, Ronald Williams.
Frank refused to discuss her relationship with Lacaze during the DOC investigation, except to say that she was trying to help him. It was later revealed that the two had an intimate relationship. She was madly in love with Lacaze. When asked why she would continue the relationship knowing that Lacaze had been involved in dealing drugs and in a shooting, she claimed that she would not disassociate herself from him just because of his past. On March 4, 1995, Frank and Lacaze visited Kim An, a Vietnamese restaurant in New Orleans East. After midnight, as the employees cleaned the closed restaurant, Chow Vu, the sister of 2 of the victims, went into the kitchen to count money. She entered the dining room of the restaurant to pay Officer Ronald A. Williams II for the night when she noticed Frank approaching the restaurant. Frank and Lacaze had been at the restaurant twice earlier in the night to get leftover food to eat. When Chow had let her out on the last visit, she could not find the front door key. With Frank returning again for a 3rd time, Chow sensed something was very wrong, so she ran to the kitchen to hide the money in the microwave. Frank entered the front door using the key that she had taken from the restaurant earlier and walked quickly past Officer Williams, pushing Chow, another of Chow's brothers, Kok, and a restaurant employee into the doorway of the restaurant's kitchen. Williams started to follow, asking them what was the problem when shots rang out. As Frank turned back to the dining room of the restaurant, Chow grabbed Kok to hide somewhere. Lacaze then fatally shot him, 3 shots to the head. Frank and Lacaze had been shouting at Ha and Kwong, demanding the restaurant's money, but they did not know where Chow had hidden it. Frank pistol-whipped 17-year-old Kwong when he hesitated in revealing the location of the money. Frank got the money out of a microwave, then shot 21-year-old Ha 3 times as she knelt, pleading for her life. Then she shot Kwong 6 times. Frank's trial began on September 5, 1995. The evidence against her was so overwhelming that Frank's attorneys did not mount a defense.
And 2 members of the family that owned the restaurant they were robbing. Lacaze was convicted on 3 counts of capital murder along with ex-NOPD officer Antoinette Frank. Lacaze was set to die by lethal injection on March 15, 1996, but that never happened. At today's resentencing, the judge noted that the death sentence is now off the table, and after repeat appeals, he was back in court today. His mother, who was inside that courtroom today, said she will not stop fighting for his freedom. He sentenced Lacaze to life without parole instead.
On September 12, 1995, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts and recommended the fatal penalty.
Here in court today, however, he did consider the defense's argument that Lacaze was too young and impressionable. The judge did not consider any of that evidence that the mom just talked about, the judge dismissing that motion, and he also denied the defense's suggestion for a resentence to receive a life sentence for a crime he committed when he was 18 years old. I should also note that Antoinette Frank has not been executed in this case either. She remains in prison. He did allow Lacaze's family to sit with him in the courtroom today for a little bit of one-on-one time with his family. WDSU legal analyst Robert Jenkins said the case relied heavily on witness testimony in the robbery gone wrong back in 1995.
The evidence supports that he was killed in the front, and the only person in the front with him that the other witness indicated was Mr. Lacaze.
She was formally sentenced to her demise on October 20, 1995, and sent to the row at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in St. Gabriel, Louisiana, very near Baton Rouge.
The convictions put Lacaze and ex-NOPD officer Antoinette Frank on death row for the last 2 decades. The ex-NOPD officer remains on death row at Angola. It's the same prison Lacaze will return to from court. Jenkins worked on Frank's case back in the 90s and says Frank is appealing too.
Lacaze was also fatally sentenced.
The long sleeve shirt was no powder burn ever found on his hands, no evidence, no blood, no nothing. The clothes he had on, the white tennis, are still white today. It's like a puzzle. You can have a puzzle with 90 pieces. If one missing, something's wrong with that puzzle, right? And they want to give him a life sentence without parole.
That's all for today, folks. See you next time.